We like to think we have a strong sense of fairness, right and wrong, and that we're good judges of what is deserved. You earned this victory, while they robbed this win from the other player. I did nothing wrong. If you've competed in any game for a length of time, I'm sure you've heard certain plays described as random. Phrases like RPS and inconsistent get tossed around a lot, especially in fighting games. When you're told you're RPSing too much, it's described as a bad thing. You need to clean up your play. But what does that mean exactly? In order to better understand this language, I thought I'd deliver a case study on a competitive game where players have no choice but to engage with explicitly random variables to learn more about what consistency means in competitions. I want to ask questions like, what makes one play consistent while another play is risky? Why can some players afford to guess wrong? How does this dynamic change in neutral versus in disadvantage, or in other games entirely? Let's have a look at a game I'm sure you're already familiar with. Competitive Pokemon at its core is about navigating the dichotomy between compromises and consistency. You can play with the most obvious switch-ins available to you, wanting to prioritize the survival of certain Pokemon above others. Or you can assume your opponent sees the same value you see in making those switches, and stay in or switch to completely different Pokemon. Both players will be making judgments of what Pokemon is worth keeping healthy, or whether it's worth going for a prediction versus a default play, which is usually to fish for a strong status that will always be helpful. To demonstrate, let's say I have a Landorus with Earthquake, Stone Edge, Knockoff, and Defog, and in front of me is a Flying type Pokemon, and they have a Steel type in the back that they could switch to. If I wanted to make a prediction and ensure massive damage, I could either click Stone Edge and kill the Flying type, or click Earthquake and cripple the Steel type. If I guess wrong, however, I leave my Pokemon vulnerable to attack with little to no reward. Instead, I could click Knockoff and remove either of their items and do considerable damage, regardless of the decision my opponent makes. While I could potentially get more reward by guessing with my main attacks, I also run the risk of being wrong and jeopardizing my Pokemon. Instead, I can hedge my bets by first doing a safer play that offers a similar reward without as many chances for something to go wrong. This is an example of a consistent default play. Examples can include knockoffs, status moves, or attacks that have a chance of applying status effects, like how Scald has a 30% chance to burn. This stance is referred to as pivoting, and the goal is to earn a position where a Pokemon can't not get value out of any of the viable options available to them. This is your win condition in most games. This is generally achieved through trading your health as a resource for switch-ins and forcing other Pokemon away with the threat of powerful moves. But singles is a long, drawn-out format. There are not many situations where a player will let a Pokemon die in 1 or even 2 hits from full health. Some Pokemon can sustain themselves with self-healing moves or buff their defenses until they can't be touched. This stalling playstyle is where RNG can turn from merely a random occurrence into a creeping inevitability. Several status effects can cripple or steal opportunities from the other player. Flinching can force the opponent to waste time while you heal with leftovers. A slow back and forth between two evenly matched Pokemon can be turned into your favor because if your Scald Burn opened up a damage threshold for you, or it cut their attack in half, letting you survive longer. Paralysis can allow you to squeak out of an otherwise completely guaranteed situation the other person had. The longer a game goes on for, the more likely these instances will be, and the more opportunities either player will have to close out an interaction, like how this Jellicent here slowly opens up a position for my Raichu to approach. Hacks, offhand for random mechanical variables, can happen early in the game too, but smart players build contingency plans for when their setup goes wrong. This is a skill that's also developed once someone gets used to anticipating a powerful attack of theirs to miss, like Focus Blast or Fire Blast. He really wants me dead. If I understand that I run the risk of wasting my turn, what can I do in case I do waste it? Is my only option to gamble with my life, or can I play this more slowly? How does this plan interact with the plan my opponent has? Here's an example of this in play. I played this horribly. I don't need 2 ghost types. I'm fine. Oh, I played this just great! No! Come on, burn. Oh. We survived! What other move do I have? No! Now, this mindset is something that applies beyond the uncertainty of the game's outcomes and engages with the unpredictable moves made by the other player. Pokemon challenges your ability to adapt your plans quickly and visualize numerous scenarios all at once with its random variables, while forcing interactions with said variables, so that players are often pressed for their decision making and time. With Freezeye and Pokegame's random battles race on YouTube gaining popularity, the value of positioning and respecting the chaos has been made more and more clear. Without team preview and teams that could have been built by 5-year-olds, inferring both players' intent and straddling hacks well become more important earlier in the skill floor, as you can't default to a game plan deliberately built for your team to carry you through lower ladders like in other modes of play. This builds a stronger acceptance towards Pokemon's RNG within higher levels of play, and opens you up to seeing it as a tool that can be used to your own advantage. This script was written with Gen 8 singles in mind at first. However, I made the wonderful decision of taking 3 writing-intensive classes last semester, and as a result, a new Pokemon game has materialized underneath my class essays and speeches. But I'm sure most of the strategies I've described are still relevant. With the introduction of Gen 9, Pokemon has had its core values shifted dramatically by removing access to constantly valuable moves like Toxic, Knockoff, and Scald. More Pokemon have less reliable ways to hedge against multiple options. The chances to earn a stable position have decreased. This has some people riled up. The reason relying on random factors and RPSes isn't valued as highly by competitors compared to a consistent style that understands how to hedge versus risks is because relying on these random factors ignores the consideration of the other player's long-term game plan, wiping away the game's aspect of neutral, and turns interactions into coin flips, especially if the game is already nudging you towards mechanically random and RPS factors a lot. In other words, the more guesses you have to make in order to win, the less control you have over your own game plan, and the more you'll be relying on the player or character matchup. Random situations repeatedly placed in your opponent's favor will inevitably win them the game. If mechanical RNG is inevitable over a long period of time, then so is guessing wrong and losing for it. In Pokemon, this can be seen in a hyper-offensive team or offensive-leaning teams where the team is built with as many Pokemon as possible, whose sole purpose is to make the other team explode. This is in contrast to the more common balanced teams that have a few members dedicated to soaking up damage to enable a slower, methodical playstyle that can outlast hyper-offense. An HO team doesn't have the luxuries of time, health, or hedging risks that a more balanced team will have. These teams are more likely to find themselves in positions where you don't have any default plays like I described earlier. All you can do is guess which super powerful move to press at the risk of getting crippled if you're wrong. Gen 9 introduced many powerful Pokemon that facilitate this playstyle, like Goldengo with its capacity to stop moves that can get rid of hazards, Glimmora with its ability to set up toxic spikes as it gets hit, and many powerful Paradox Pokemon that can punch holes through teams, not to mention Terastalization's ability to buff Pokemon's damage output immensely. At the same time, defensive Pokemon have been gutted or removed with the transition of the new gen. Healing moves can only be used half as often before they're no longer available, which makes it harder to make plays like the Jellicent one we saw earlier. Defensive water types can't guarantee the same value with Scald being taken away. In return, every Pokemon has a chance to completely change their typing, turning defensive matchups on their heads, but only on the right guess. This same power can be used offensively though, with the most powerful Pokemon benefiting from this mechanic. It's a win-more system. Some games even hinge on guessing whether or not a Pokemon will terastallize into a particular type, which adds more excitement and randomness to the game. Oh fuck, he turned into a bird! You see that shit? Scarlet and Violet is an example of how a game's core values shift away from a sense of consistency to demanding the players guess more, with pushback from the Smogon community. At the time of writing, Smogon is currently suspect testing Terastallization to determine whether it's necessary to warp the options available to the players or the information that is shared in order to build an experience that shows respect to the player's sense of competition. Whether or not Terra is broken isn't important to me or this essay. I want to focus on the fact that this is a question. Scarlet and Violet have a wide range of options available to the player. These new Pokemon are perhaps more powerful than the ones seen in Sword and Shield, but the ecosystem surrounding these options also makes them of more varying viability when applied to several different situations, as opposed to an individually weaker but more consistent option available in Sword and Shield. Terastallization is simply the embodiment of one end of the ranges possible in this dynamic between consistency and potential power. The questions of what is consistent and what is valuable are answered differently on the basis of independent metagames, games, matchups, specific circumstances, and more. Something that is consistent and valuable in one situation may be only risky but rewarding in another. Pokemon has the space to offer methodical planning and improvisation in the moment of the game. Players study this dynamic during a match and are capable of doing so due to its turn-based system, among other factors. Risk and reward can be analyzed in real time to determine what positions are valuable, but you might have noticed this isn't a Pokemon channel. Not yet, anyway. With the key points of the inevitability of randomness and a dynamic system of appraising risk and reward in mind, let's have a look at fighting games and what it means to engage with RPS in these games. Most fighting games aren't turn-based and don't allow for this observation of the game without getting punched in the face. Not every game can be Yomi Hustle, as cool as that would be. Your methodical side is best used in the lab to build deliberate pressure that you can use to manipulate your opponent, paying attention to the different resources your opponent has, along with wisely using your defensive options when you're forced to guess in order to win. The merits of building a game plan and widening your understanding of resources are videos of their own to make later. I want to be focusing more on the last part of the statement. The question of risk and reward in fighting games is most apparent when you're in a defensive situation, when you have to guess between strikes or throws or left or right or high or low and whatever the fuck's going on. At the most basic level. When defending, I have a jab that can stuff throws, but will get me murdered against attacks. Or I can block and leave myself vulnerable to throws and pressure resets, neither of which will lead to much damage by themselves. This math leads players to the defensive philosophy of taking the throw, which deems the throw as a better outcome than trying to take your turn back and potentially losing half your health for it. This RPS is skewed towards a specific direction, so it must mean that if I simply pick the least punishing option each time, all I need to do is wait for the other player to pick something else, and I'll win more often than not. This could be the same thing as pressing knockoff or skull. This is my default play. The approach here is powerful enough to get you up to floor 9 in Strive. Everyone who wants players to improve starts by begging them to block more. But after that level is met, it's not nuanced enough to hold any weight versus someone who will reset their pressure or throw you every time you prove to them that you won't stop their offense. Why not just try to read their approach each time then? If I guess they'll grab, I can just jab or jump or try to take my turn back. I can try to be right more often than not. Remember what I said earlier? Random situations repeatedly placed in your opponent's favor will inevitably win them the game. This includes mix-ups on knockdowns and during stagger pressure. Hoping to guess right is a strategy you may use on defense, but it is not reliable against anyone you're playing versus at a level where you're capable of thinking about the game this deeply anyway. The reward you get for jabbing out of a throw is generally much lower compared to the opponent's reward for beating the jab with immediate attack or frame trap It is statistically inconsistent to go for a mash, regardless of whatever conditioning you think your opponent is going for. Some stronger players will gladly lose to a mash sometimes and spend a small amount of health if it confirms to them that you don't value your life and will explode the next time they get in on you. In these player-based games, especially as fast-paced as a fighting game, I do have to acknowledge that there is a sense that something isn't truly random if you've conditioned someone to act in a certain way. But there's a reason I'm still using this as an RPS. There's a reason I'm still comparing it to RNG. After a certain point, players can tell when you are manipulating their expectations. It's that if I know that you know that I know this will happen, and you know that I know that you know that I know, and then this and that, and it just runs around in a circle, and other players just won't bite anyway. They'll refuse to adapt or play ahead of your potential adaptations, and miss the opportunity to be conditioned. At these opposite levels of awareness in a disadvantaged state, it circles back to a coin flip, to a guess, random. And even if you do try to jab out and you guess right, you could still mistime your mash and lose to grab anyway. On paper, this might not make any sense, because most jabs are 5 frames, and you have that 5-frame window to make sure that you don't get grabbed if you call it out. But I've had it happen too many times because I was too slow or scared to pull the trigger. The easy, risky option can still just lose sometimes, and the next time you're in that situation, all they need to do is attack you to beat it and get that juicy counter hit. It's a guess where, depending on your reactions, both sides can end up against you. You can't even do a safer jump to avoid the throw on a hard knockdown, since jump will also lose to immediate attack. Other simple options against grab will put you in a similar situation. I have 2 basic options here. I could either keep flipping this coin and base all outcomes on my opponent's timing, and call Strive a baby masher game, or I can try finding another method in order to escape these either-ors that keep players plateaued and stop them from learning more about the game. There's gotta be a way I can hedge against both options without spending all my meter on a safe reversal. Luckily for us, there are techniques that allow you to block an attack while still hedging against grabs. In fighting games, there are mechanics that offer you different situations based on what the opponent does. These are called option selects, or fuzzies depending on who you ask. This is the equivalent of pressing a set of buttons that would Stone Edge the flying type and Earthquake the steel type, depending on if the opponent stayed in or switched out. Strong value in either situation. These take many forms, but I want to look at the defensive fuzzy jump today. The goal is to block an attack or jump out of a throw with the same input, regardless of what the opponent does. To do this, we hold down back in order to block the attack, and then we hold up back in order to protect against grab. The goal is to aim for your grounded block to last long enough to protect you from the attack, but short enough for the jump to come out before a grab can get you. If they attack on the ground, your jump will be eaten by the block stun of the grounded attack. Armed with this knowledge, you can build variations on the idea, like fuzzy mash, a fuzzy throwtech, fuzzy backdash, or more depending on what you're more comfortable with, or what the situation demands from you. Defensive OSs serve to diffuse RPS by covering multiple options and demanding counterplay from your opponent that allows you more chances to take your turn back, by introducing more situations where your raw mashing can win. Consider this, when I practice fuzzies, I get several benefits. I am forcing my opponent to delay his pressure in order to keep me locked down. I can use the fact that I blocked his attacks in the air to tell me that he is delaying his attacks, which is information I can use to take my turn back more easily without needlessly risking myself to counter hits. Ironically, this opens up mashing as a more viable option. The coin flip turns into something more like rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, giving you more space to find overlapping, consistent options to use in your defense. By acknowledging I'm doing something more difficult than mashing, I also ready myself for the chance that I'll mess up. I'm not expecting to get it right as often, so I'll be less frustrated at my losses that hinged on my execution. I also get to apply this knowledge of OSs to other applications like fuzzy mashing to take my turn back more quickly, or building OSs from offensive hit-stop scenarios. In contrast, the coin flip of raw mash or jump or whatever versus raw block only offers a watered-down defense where I forego my control of the situation and simply hope that I'm right this time. Many of the benefits of learning OSs rise beyond their immediate application, offering a wider understanding of how people can navigate the game. The last 2 points I described aren't directly related to the outcome of the match or even what I'm trying to do, but are huge for my overall enjoyment of the game. This could be important to you too, based on what you personally value, regardless of whatever it is the metagame values. Whether or not this is something you want to put time into is generally based on what you personally value, and whether the values of the game you play can accommodate what it is you want to do instead. I describe what the metagame values roughly as what skills and strategies give you the best chances to win. But remember that winning can be defined by the player as something beyond the victory screen. Maybe you're more interested in getting into the player's head, going for strong reads and staring into their souls. You're the kind of person who would focus blast in front of a ghost type because you know they'll switch out to someone who died to the move, or you DP the first 2 times you were knocked down just to wake up and grab the opponent for blocking the 3rd time. These risky plays still offer you something enjoyable beyond their value in the game itself. Maybe you want to learn more about how to cover as many options as possible and suffocate the opponent with the sheer might of the game's engine when you're pushed back. You're assured by your contingency plans and OSs to cover any missteps. In any case, I think there is wisdom in understanding what consistency means, so we can determine what's a gimmick and what's growth that will follow you after the last match is over. In fighting games, I find that I value player agency and interaction. I hate the feeling of being bogged down and forced to play someone else's game without interacting with it. I want to be able to condition and manipulate the other player in any state of the game while paying attention to their own plans so I can pick them apart. Control over my losses. I want to know that I lost due to a bad decision I made rather than because I guessed wrong. I want to be prepared for the chance of bad execution messing me up too. Growth beyond the results screen. I believe that engaging with things like fighting games at this level can offer us skills and understandings we can carry into other games or other aspects of our lives. The decisions I strive to make in the game serve not only my chances to win the individual game, but also serve my growth as a player and directly engage with what I find fun in the games. That's how I can consistently find value in my play. At the end of the day, we can't predict nearly as much as we'd like to a T. If we're working with random elements, then they demand our respect. RNG is bullshit. RPSes are bullshit. And if the other player you're playing versus has gotten as far as you have, then they've figured out how to minimize its effect, use it to their advantage against you to build win conditions, and they develop backup plans in case their plan A gets struck by full paralysis or a whack mix-up. Whether these plans happen in minutes or seconds is up to the games we play. Learn how to survey the battlefield, decide what actions offer you the most value and what positions leave you in the most danger, and you will find yourself effectively having the power to see into the future. And while we're at it, let's appreciate the unpredictability. It's something that will always be consistent. You can't win them all. If you can see the weaknesses of the value of your options in bad situations, then you can put aside your ego and expectations, stop looking to blame something for the outcome, and begin taking more responsibility on figuring out what your next steps could be. If you're forced into guessing too often and you're losing for that, then you either need some shift in perspective, or your opponent has you in their win condition and they've earned this. These situations are chances to grow beyond our flowcharts, or to expand upon them so that we find ourselves in new situations that could shatter the skill plateaus we find ourselves stuck in. Thank you so much for watching. I know I took my time with this script, both in the actual delivery and in the process of making it. I had a version of this script where I was going to talk about Hero and Smash Bros. And like random elements in shooter games, and it was a fucking mess. I'm sorry, but I'm doing my best. I hope you are too. I'll see you again later.